welcome to the second part of our interactive door series. In our last tutorial, we learned how to create our door blueprint and make our door billboard pop up when we ran into our door and notify us whether or not the door is locked or unlocked, and for our billboard to go away when we walk away. In this tutorial, we're going to learn how to make our door open. So go ahead and open your door blueprint. I'm just going to drag a box over this area and right click, and I'm going to actually create a comment for the selection just to keep organized, and I'm going to call this make billboard up here, because that's what this section of our code is meant to do. We are going to edit this a little bit later on once we add our key, but for now let's leave this alone and scroll over to some empty space in our blueprint. Again, this is our blueprint for our door, which should be compiled with a frame, a door, a collision, and a billboard. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is add our interact to our blueprint by going again to the class settings up here at the top. Click on that, and then within the details panel, we're going to add our interact blueprint by going to our interfaces section, and within implemented interfaces, we're going to click add and search for your BPI interact. I called mine a simple interact. You may have called yours something different. Try to keep things organized and keep them named by the most accurate name that you can think of. So now this is added, and as you can see under interfaces, now I have the script for interact with world objects within my door. So we're going to go back to our event graph, and we're going to actually use this as the initiation for our next code. I'm going to right click and I'm going to look for event interact with world object, which is a script that was created in our third person blueprint. If you do not have this, you would need to go back to the tutorial interactive house that was posted on the interactive house assignment and learn how to create your interact blueprint for the light switch. But if you have this, it should be red, and this is coming from the interaction BP that you made last. Cool, so once we interact by pressing E, we need to check whether or not our door is locked. And right now we don't have a way to unlock it, but we're going to add that in our third tutorial. So for now it will just stay locked. So what we're going to do is bring out a branch and check whether is door locked is true or false. Branch, as you remember, is basically how we check a Boolean condition and create different results based on whether it's true or false. Okay, and we need to, of course, pair our condition is door locked to the condition here by just dragging this in and clicking. Again, I'll do this again slower, but you're going to drag it in, let go, and then select get is door locked. We're not setting it because that would be changing it. We're just getting it and reading what the variable is set to at this time. Cool. So we're going to have a different state whether the door is locked or not. If it's locked, clearly we won't be actually opening it. But just for now, let's actually make both true and false go to the same thing, just so we can test this thing when we don't have a key yet to unlock it. That will be in our third tutorial. So I'm going to pull out a string out of true just to test it, right? Because obviously, if you think about it, if the door was locked, we wouldn't want this to happen off of true, but only off of false. But we're going to do it off of true this time, and we're going to pull out what is called a flip-flop. Flip-flop is really cool. Basically, it changes what happens based on like how many times you do it. So like, for example, you do it the first time, it's going to do what happens in A. The second time it's going to go to B and then back to A and back to B. The reason we do that is so we can make the door open and close and open and close, and instead of just opening it again and again. It's going to be more realistic. So the first time, since it's closed, we're going to have the A state be what happens when we open our door. This is when it gets trickier. We're actually going to stop right here, and we're going to create a new type of item that you've never created before, called a timeline. What a timeline does is kind of like if you were in Premiere Pro and you're doing keyframes to a certain animation. If y'all spent some time in Premiere Pro, you might know what I'm talking about. But basically, we're going to add a timeline. And you're going to search for timeline and then click add timeline. So we're going to have to create our own custom timeline to rotate the door across time so that it has an accurate animation. For this timeline, we can call this opening door, and it should be yellow. And this is basically like all these things will show us how we can play and reverse the animation. Now, in order to actually make this thing functional, we have to actually go into the timeline itself and set it up the right way. This is where it gets a little confusing, so just bear with me. I'll go slow. Okay, so our timeline is now empty. We're going to have to double click on this and open a new type of editor panel that you won't always see. Now, right now, we don't have anything in here because we have to create our own custom track to control this animation. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to change the length of this track up here before I even create it to 3.00, and that is because it was originally set to 5, but this length is going to represent the number of seconds it takes our door to open. And 5 seconds is pretty slow, so it just looks a bit better if we do 3, because 5 is like very slow. Unless you want it to be really dramatic, you can do it whatever length you want, but I think 3 is a good solid length. And once that's set, I'm going to click on this add track button right here, and I'm going to add a track. Now, it gives me some options of what type of track. For this, we need to add a float track. Float is a number with a decimal. And now you may see something that looks a little familiar. It's basically a graph. Now, what this graph is referring to is dependent on what you code it to. For us, this is on the bottom, the x-axis. This will represent the number of seconds passed. And on the y-axis, this will represent what happens in our code from 0 to 100, which actually will set to be the rotation of the door. So what I'm going to do is just name this track door rotate, and we're going to start adding some keyframes. This is where it gets even trickier, but just bear with me. Of course, if you have problems with this, raise your hand, but it's pretty simple. I'm doing this again because the last time I made my track, it got kind of messed up. So I'm going to make sure the length is set to 3, and I'm just going to set a new track. Add a float track. Alright, now bear with me. Our first, and I'm going to call this door open up at the top. Okay, so our first point needs to be at 0, 0. So you should go here to 0, 0, and we're just going to create a point here by right-clicking on this 0, 0 point. And we need to set the parameter up here to x is the time, and it's 0, and the value is 0. Okay, now we're going to do one at 3 seconds. And for some reason, my graph has really weird settings, but I think it's going to be fine if I just go here and right-click and add a key. I'm going to, instead of like doing it on the graph down here, I'm going to just type in the values up here. So for the time, I'm going to put 3 seconds, and at 3 seconds, our value should simply be 1. For some reason, mine was set to like something crazy, which was 64, and I'm just going to press enter. And now if you actually zoom to fit, my graph should look like this. 0, 0 is the first one, and then at 3 seconds it should be set to 1. That's because our door is basically going from 0 to 100% open. This is 0% open, this is 100% open. That's why we make our highest value to be 1. And if you have trouble with that, again, just raise your hand. This is probably the trickiest part and the most new part. So once I create that, I can save it, and I'll go back to my event graph. Okay, now we actually have values in this opening door timeline. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the A state to play and the B state to reverse. That's going to make it go from open to close, so that it goes from opening to closing. Cool. Okay, now what I'm going to do is make this timeline actually control my door opening. In order to do that, okay, I'm going to pull out from update, and I'm going to look for set relative not rotation, not location, but rotation, and make sure we're setting the relative rotation of the door. So as you see, it's down here for me. To be more clear, you can just type the door in parentheses. So it's set relative rotation, not location and rotation, just our rotation. We're not moving it out of its place, we're just rotating it so it looks opening. Cool, so you're almost done, but we just need to control our values now. So the new rotation is 0, 0, 0, that won't do anything. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to right click on this point here and say split struct pin, so that I can individually change each axis, because we're not changing our X or Y axis. We don't want our door to like flip over any type of way, just open it. So we're just doing the Z, that's the up and down, that's like the door opening on the hinge. Now if you want your door to like scroll open kind of like in another type of way, talk to me about that. There is other things you could do to open your door. If you have, for example, like a garage type of door, a garage door, or like a like one of those automatic doors they have at the mall. You would not do it this way, you would do it a different way, but for most of our doors, especially if you use the one that I use, this will be working good. Okay, now our new rotation value needs to be 90 degrees, so it's perfectly open. We're going to put 90 here for our rotation. However, it won't do anything that cool yet, because it's not going to actually animate. And I'm going to actually compile and save and just demonstrate what it looks like before I implement my timeline correctly. Because there's one more thing we're missing, but this is what it will look like if I don't really implement my timeline properly. So it should still open, but it just won't look as elegant as it will when I actually implement the gradual opening with the timeline. Okay, so my door's over here. I go up to it. I still see that it's locked, but because I allowed me to open it when I'm unlocked, if I press E, it just snaps open. Now, that's all right. It's okay. For some reason, I can't go through. I think it's the collision of the wall. But it's not really that cute. We're going to make this better. And what we're going to do is, for some reason, it's not closing. I don't know why. But we're going to make this better by implementing the timeline. So I'm going to go back here, and all I need to do to implement the timeline is just use what's called a linear interpretation. Linear interpretation, it basically takes the value and it lets it go over the time that we made in our timeline. So I'm going to drag a node out of our door opening timeline float, and I'm going to look for LERP, or linear interpretation. I'm going to get a simple lerp, and it has two values, the A state and the B state. We want our B state to be 90 degrees, okay? And we are going to go from A, which is 0, to 90, and we need to connect this actually to the alpha instead of the A. I'm going to disconnect this from here and keep this set to 0, 0, because we're going from 0 to 90 across the time of the timeline. The alpha is just basically letting us know like the value over time. It's kind of hard to explain, but just do it this way and it should be good. And the last thing I need to do is check my return value to the rotation of the z-axis. So now basically I'm using this timeline that we created to gradually open the door from 0 to 90 degrees and the z-axis, and that should now work. I will test it out now. Okay. All right, coolness. So what I'm going to do now is just simply go up to my door, make sure I'm in there, and now it is opening in 3 seconds, which is super cute. There's obviously something wrong with the collision of this wall, so I'm going to have to check that out later. But now I can actually close my door and open it. Very cool. So in our last in our last tutorial, I'm going to teach you guys how to make a key and make the key control whether or not I can open the door, so that I actually have a use for this lock and just add some challenge to my game and my parkour. But if you reach this point, you have finished with part 2 of the 3 series tutorial and creating an interactive door with a key and lock in Unreal Engine. Good job everybody, and I'll see you tomorrow.